All right, get ready to dive into Thinking Fast and Slow with us today.
Oh, this one's a classic.
It really is. This book is practically legendary. It's changed the way we look at behavioral economics.
Psychology,
Yeah, psychology.
even just everyday decision making.
Absolutely. I mean, Kahneman really broke down this complex thing, this complex thing we call the mind,
Right.
into a framework that's both insightful and deusable.
Totally, totally. It's so true. He really did kind of like
Yeah.
create a usable framework for
Yeah.
this thing that we call the mind that's just so complex.
Exactly. And the core of it,
It's something that we think about all the time, too.
right, it's like, how do we think?
Exactly.
And the core of it is this idea of two systems.
Two systems.
System one,
Yes.
the quick, intuitive part of our thinking, and system two,
Sorry.
the slower, more deliberate part.
Yes. And the thing is, understanding how these systems work, no matter what you do, like it doesn't matter what you do for a living, what your interests are.
It's so relevant.
It's relevant to everybody.
It is. So let's start with system one, the one that's always running in the background.
Okay.
One of the things Kahneman dives into is how system one relies on these mental shortcuts called heuristics.
Yeah, heuristics. And heuristics are essential because they allow us to make quick judgments,
Yeah.
which is really useful in a lot of situations.
Sure, yeah.
Like we're walking down the street, we need to make a quick judgment.
Exactly, exactly.
But the trade-off is that they can sometimes lead to biases, right?
Right.
So there's predictable errors in thinking.
Okay, so it's like our brain is optimizing for speed, not always accuracy.
Precisely. It's like
Yeah.
just make a quick decision, keep moving.
Exactly.
It doesn't need to be the perfect decision, just keep it moving.
Okay, so how does this actually show up in our lives?
Sure.
Give me an example of a heuristic gone wrong.
Okay. Well, take the availability heuristic, for instance. This is where we tend to overestimate the likelihood of events that are easier to recall,
Okay.
often because they were really vivid or emotionally charged.
Ooh, okay, I think I get it.
Okay.
So, like, if we see a news story about a shark attack,
Right.
even though it's statistically rare, we might suddenly become terrified of swimming in the ocean.
Exactly. Or think about when Michael Jackson died. That was tragic, of course. But for weeks, it felt like that was the only thing anyone was talking about.
Oh, totally. I remember that. It was everywhere. You couldn't get away from it.
Right. And because of that constant exposure, it felt so much more significant, at least in that moment,
Right, right.
than, say, a less sensational but arguably more crucial issue,
Right.
like declining education standards.
Wow, that's such a good point. It's like our emotions
Totally.
completely hijack our sense of what's truly important.
Absolutely, yeah. We pay attention to what's really available in our minds,
Totally.
not necessarily what's statistically most likely or impactful in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, that's a little unsettling, but also super insightful.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how important it is to be aware of these mental shortcuts and how they can skew our perception.
Yes, yes.
So if heuristics are one way our fast thinking can trip us up, what else is going on in System 1?
Well, there's this fascinating phenomenon called priming. And this is where exposure to one stimulus can unconsciously influence our response to a subsequent one.
Oh, this is where it gets really interesting. I've heard about some of the experiments in this area.
Yes.
They're kind of mind-blowing.
They really are. One classic study involved having students unscramble sentences containing words related to the elderly, like Florida, forgetful, gray.
Okay, so they're priming them with these elderly-related concepts. What happened? I'm ready.
Well, here's the kicker. Afterwards, without even realizing it, those students actually walked slower down the hallway
What? Stop.
than those who hadn't unscrambled those words.
No way. Seriously.
Isn't that crazy?
Just from unscrambling a few words. That's wild.
It's insane. It really highlights the power of unconscious influence. And this has huge implications for everything from marketing, like think about the way products are packaged and advertised to appeal to our subconscious desires.
Totally.
And like how we form opinions about people and ideas.
It's like our brains are constantly being subtly influenced by factors we're not even aware of.
Constantly.
Yeah, if something as simple as a few words can change our behavior, what does that mean for our ability to make conscious, deliberate decisions?
You're hitting on all the big questions.
I know, right? Because that's kind of alarming to think about.
It's a little scary.
Yeah.
It really is.
So if something as simple as a few words can change our behavior, what does that mean for our ability to make conscious, deliberate decisions?
It's a great question.
I mean, do we have any control?
And it leads us to another important concept that Kahneman explores. The idea of cognitive ease.
Okay, cognitive ease. Let's unpack that.
Okay.
I'm guessing it has something to do with how our brains love when things are simple and easy to process.
You got it. System 1, our fast thinking system, equates cognitive ease with truth. Information that's presented fluently or comes from a source we already trust just feels more believable to us.
Oh, interesting.
So even if it's not.
Yeah, so it's like our brains are saying, hey, if it's easy to understand, it must be true, even if it's not actually accurate.
Exactly. You got it. And Kahneman highlights how factors that have nothing to do with factual accuracy, like a clear font or even rhyming language, can make information seem more truthful.
Oh,
Isn't that
wow.
crazy?
So even the way something is presented visually can influence how believable we find it?
Uh-huh.
That's both fascinating and a little concerning.
Oh, 100%.
Ugh.
It is concerning because it means we can be easily swayed by superficial factors without even realizing it.
Right.
And it just really highlights the importance of engaging system 2,
Yes.
our slower, more analytical system, to
Yeah.
do some critical thinking and fact-checking.
Which, let's be honest, sometimes feels like a Herculean effort.
You're telling me it's like system 2 is that friend who's always saying, let's just stay in when you're trying to get them to go out.
Uh-huh. That's a perfect analogy.
Every time.
Yeah.
Like, come on, let's go. I'd rather just stay in.
Let's just order a pizza.
I'm good. Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got this lazy system 2 that's supposed to be keeping our impulsive system 1 in check. What happens when system 2 just doesn't bother to show up? Tell me more about this lazy controller and what happens when it decides to take a nap. Okay, so we've got this lazy system 2 that's supposed to be keeping our impulsive system 1 in check. What happens when system 2 just doesn't bother to show up? Tell me more about this lazy controller and what happens when it decides to take a nap.
Well, the thing about system 2 is it's effortful.
Yeah.
It takes actual mental energy to engage that slower, more analytical part of our thinking.
And I'm guessing our brains aren't always so keen on expending extra energy unless they absolutely have to.
You got it. Kahneman actually studied this effort in a really interesting way by measuring pupil dilation.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Our pupils dilate more when we're using system 2. I never would have guessed.
It's true.
That's so wild.
In his experiments, people's pupils would dilate significantly when they were engaged in difficult mental tasks,
Wow.
showing the actual strain system 2 puts on our brains.
So it's like our brains are physically working harder when system 2 is in charge. What kind of tasks were they doing in these experiments?
Well, one that they used was called add 3.
Okay.
And participants had to listen to a string of digits and then repeat them back with 3 added to each digit.
Ooh, that sounds deceptively difficult.
It is. And it's not just the pupils. Their heart rates increase too,
Yeah.
showing the real physical and mental effort involved in keeping system 2 engaged.
Okay, so all that effort really takes it out of us, both mentally and physically.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's where this idea of ego depletion comes in, right? We literally wear ourselves out trying to make good decisions.
Exactly. When we exert self-control or mental effort in one task, it depletes our ability to do so in subsequent ones.
So this is why after a long day of work, filled with tough decisions and intense focus, we're more likely to give in to that craving for ice cream even when we're trying to eat healthy.
Exactly.
Or whatever it is.
By the end of the day, your system 2 is basically tapped out, which is why you might find yourself making more impulsive choices like
Yes.
overspending at the grocery store
Oh, yeah.
or mindlessly scrolling through social media instead of reading that book you've been meaning to get to.
Oh, tell me about it. My poor system 2 is basically waving a white flag by the time I get home.
Every time.
So is there any way to, strengthen our system 2? Make it less susceptible to this decision fatigue?
Well, there's a fascinating connection here to the cognitive reflection test, or CRT,
Okay.
which was designed to measure our tendency to override those quick, intuitive System 1 responses.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of this. It's all about tricking our gut reaction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A classic example is the bat and ball problem.
Oh, yeah.
A bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball.
Okay.
How much does the ball cost?
10 cents. Oh, wait, no. That doesn't add up. Hold on, let me think.
That's the thing.
Okay.
Most people immediately jump to that answer because it feels right.
Right.
It's our intuitive System 1 trying to save the day, be efficient.
It's definitely what my system 1 was screaming at me.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the real answer?
The ball costs 5 cents.
Okay.
It takes a bit of that deliberate System 2 thinking to get there.
I see how that one tricks you.
Yeah.
So how does this test relate to decision-making in the real world?
Well, what's fascinating is that people who score lower on this test, meaning they're more likely to go with that initial System 1 response, also tend to be more impulsive and impatient in other areas of their lives.
So it suggests that there's a link between our ability to engage in cognitive reflection and our overall decision-making tendencies.
Exactly. Exactly. It's not a perfect correlation,
Right.
but it does make you wonder, if we can become more aware of those gut reactions and learn to pause and engage System 2,
Yeah.
could we make more thoughtful, reasoned choices in all areas of our lives?
It's like giving ourselves a beat to think before we act.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about heuristics, priming, cognitive ease, and now this idea of ego depletion and the importance of cognitive reflection. What other mental traps do we need to be aware of? Kahneman goes into a lot of detail about specific biases. What's a big one we should have on our radar? Okay, so we've talked about heuristics, priming, cognitive ease, and now this idea of ego depletion and the importance of cognitive reflection. What other mental traps do we need to be aware of? Kahneman goes into a lot of detail about specific biases. What's a big one we should have on our radar?
Well, the anchoring effect is a major one. This is where our judgments get swayed by completely arbitrary starting points, even when we know they're irrelevant.
Okay, that sounds kind of crazy. Do you have an example? How can something totally random influence our judgments?
Yeah. So Kahneman talks about this experiment where they had people spin a wheel of fortune that was rigged to either land on 10 or 65.
Okay.
Then they asked them to estimate the percentage of African nations in the UN.
Okay, so spinning a wheel and answering a geography question, what's the connection?
Here's the kicker. Those who spun at 10 gave significantly lower estimates than those who spun at 65.
Get out of here. Seriously, the wheel had nothing to do with the actual percentage, but it still affected their thinking.
Exactly. The random number acted as an anchor, unconsciously influencing their estimations, even though they should have been completely unrelated.
Wow, that's both fascinating and a little scary. So how do we avoid falling prey to this anchoring effect, especially when we might not even realize it's happening?
Well, I think awareness is key, right? Just knowing about the anchoring effect can make you more cautious about the first piece of information you encounter, especially in situations like negotiations.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So like if you're negotiating a salary and your potential employer throws out a lowball offer, don't let that number become your anchor.
Exactly.
Right.
Do your research, figure out what's reasonable, and come prepared with your own counteroffer.
Love it.
Don't let that initial number, dictate the entire conversation.
Yeah, that's super practical advice. I'm definitely going to be more mindful of this in the future. So anchoring is one bias to watch out for. What else?
Another big one is the representativeness heuristic, which is all about how we tend to rely on stereotypes, and how closely something matches our mental categories rather than considering actual statistical probabilities.
Ooh, so this is about how our brains love to categorize things and jump to conclusions based on those categories.
Exactly. Kahneman illustrates this with the Tom W. problem,
Okay.
where people are given a description of Tom W. that's designed to sound like a stereotypical computer science student.
Got it. Okay.
He's really into sci-fi, good with logic puzzles, that kind of thing.
Okay, I'm already picturing Tom W. in my head.
Right. So they ask people to rank different fields of graduate study based on how likely it is that Tom W. is a student in each field.
And I bet most people put computer science at the top of the list.
You got it. But here's the thing. They also give you some base rate information, like the fact that there are far fewer computer science graduate students than, say, humanities students.
So even though Tom W. sounds like he fits the computer science stereotype, statistically speaking, it's much more likely he's in a field with a higher base rate.
Exactly. We get so caught up in the story and how well Tom W. matches our mental image of a computer science student that we ignore the actual probabilities.
Wow, it's amazing how easily our brains can be fooled by these mental shortcuts.
Yeah.
And how important it is to take a step back and consider the bigger picture.
Totally. Totally.
Okay, one last concept I have to ask about regression to the mean.
Yes.
This one always trips me up.
It's a tricky one.
It really is.
The basic idea is that extreme events tend to be followed by more average ones.
Right, so if we have an amazing performance at work, it's statistically likely that our next one won't be quite as stellar.
Right.
Not necessarily because we've gotten worse, but just because of natural fluctuations.
Exactly. And Kahneman uses this example of flight instructors who praised cadets after exceptionally good performance
Okay.
and reprimanded them after exceptionally bad performance.
Right, but because performance naturally fluctuates, they ended up praising cadets who then did worse and reprimanding those who then did better. It created this illusion that praise made them worse and reprimands made them better.
Precisely. It's a reminder that we often misattribute these natural fluctuations to skill or effort, when in reality, chance plays a much bigger role than we realize.
This has been such a thought-provoking conversation. It really makes you think about all the different ways our brains are constantly making judgments and decisions, often without us even realizing it.
That's the beauty of Kahneman's work, right? It brings to light these unconscious processes and gives us a whole new vocabulary for understanding how our minds work.
So as we go about our day, noticing these mental shortcuts and biases in action, what can we actually do with this knowledge? How can we use it to make better decisions?
Yeah, that's the big question. I mean, for starters, just being aware of these biases is huge, right?
Neat.
It allows us to pause and question our assumptions, to recognize when our system one might be leading us astray.
So it's about cultivating that self-awareness and creating space for a little more system two thinking in our lives. A little bit
Exactly.
more.
A little can go a long way. And the more we understand about how our minds work, the better equipped we are to navigate this complex world and make choices that align with our goals and values.
It's like Kahneman is handing us a set of tools for better thinking. What a gift. This has been an incredible deep dive. Thanks so much for guiding us through it. And to our listeners, we hope you found this exploration of thinking fast and slow as fascinating as we have. Keep those System 1 and System 2 brains working, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.